Hello, all you wonderful people out there. This is the SMC Journal podcast, the show about systems engineering in all of IT today. We're talking about software stuff, hardware stuff, DevOps stuff, optimization, observability, AI, whatever. It's all on board this year. I'm Scott Moore, your host, and I appreciate you joining me. The funnest thing about the job that I do right now with creating this type of content for you is I get to talk to a lot of people. Some of those people I have actually known for several years, and our paths are crossing again, but we're in different roles. Me now as a podcaster and media mogul. My next guest I've known for literally over a decade. And this is a person who does have a performance engineering background, but they are in a different field. So Shane Evans was the product manager for LoadRunner for several years, and I remember contacting him after he had left Micro Focus at the time. I'm like, "What are you doing now?" He goes, "I'm going to start this thing up, and it's going to be in the gaming industry, like video games." And this is an area where I really know nothing about. Now, I can probably kick your butt in Galaga, maybe Miss Pac-Man, but I'm not a real modern gamer. And that whole industry has come so far, and the type of software and technology and the engines that are being used in that is just way beyond what I'm working with in enterprise. I mean, it's just a different animal. So I got to thinking about this. I'm like, I need to talk to Shane. So I wanted to bring him on the show to talk about his company, Gamedriver, and what they're doing around test automation and all kinds of tests in the gaming industry. So let's talk to Shane Evans today. Hey, Shane Evans, welcome to the SMC Journal podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I've known you for so many years, I've lost count. We have worked together in many different positions that you've had. You are the co-founder, and chief product officer of Gamedriver, and I'd like for you to introduce yourself to our audience and your company, Gamedriver. What is it?
Sure. Probably the simplest answer is think of Selenium, but for game engines.
Okay.
And so we provide test automation tools and solutions for anyone building anything in game engines like Unity, Unreal. That includes XR applications, VR, AR, like Oculus Quest apps, as well as games, of course, which is in the name.
You've got a cool background that I think we should mention, because even though you're doing the functional automation for gaming, you have a background in performance testing as well. So that's
Yeah.
when I first met you, is when you took over as the product manager for LoadRunner, HP, and into the Micro Focus era. So how does that background help you with Gamedriver? Is it relatable at all, or is this a totally different ball game?
Absolutely relatable, and one of the things that we focused on from the beginning of Gamedriver was not just that it works, but that it works and it performs well. And so there's a an eye to latency and performance here that doesn't necessarily exist in functional testing for like web and mobile applications. One of the demos that we give to our customers is, you're playing a tennis game on a mobile app, and this is built with a game engine, of course, like Unity, but you're swiping up to return a ball on a screen. Well, if your testing tool is too slow to respond to the return of that serve, then the test is going to fail every time. And so our tools need to be performant. The overhead of the tools needs to be super low so that we're not impacting the performance of the apps that we're testing. But also, an aspect of testing is understanding how well this game is performing on each and every device, right? It's not enough that it works well on my machine. It's got to work well on the myriad of devices that are being targeted, whether it's a mobile device or a console or a headset like an XR device. And so we do keep a pretty close eye on performance as well. One of the early partnerships that we made was with a company called GameBench, and their focus is entirely on the performance of games, of course, as their name implies. And so they're tracking things like frames per second, the CPU, memory utilization, battery utilization, all of those things on the device, whatever the device may be, while you're running your tests or while your app is being used by consumers. But the one thing they lacked was the workload automation. So they couldn't build consistent, repeatable tests so that you could take a snapshot of the performance of that game or app and compare it to historical views. And so, again, that's our bread and butter, right? So making sure that we're able to build the consistent, repeatable workloads. We don't necessarily, you know, just focus on functional testing, although that's what a lot of our customers are using it for. It's really about the automation of the workload, and then what we do to capture, performance metrics or functional assertions that are passing is up to the user.
I remember when I first heard that you were going into this space, and I'll be honest, I'm not a big gamer at all, but I have a lot of friends who are.
Yeah.
This to me just is a totally different realm. I mean, I know in enterprise we expect low latency and we want all these things, but I mean, in the gaming world, I'm sure it's just as important, sometimes even more important, as the gameplay has to be so fast. But here's the thing: if these companies are not using Gamedriver, what is their alternative? Like, what were they doing before you came along?
The majority of testing in the space is entirely manual. So imagine you're building a DevOps like process where they've got all these modern tools and practices in development, and then they deploy a build or release to testing, and then testing is manual, and you just throw more bodies at it. And so you've got this highly, and then after manual testing is done, you go back to that automated process of releasing and monitoring and all those good things. But imagine hinging that entire process on manual testing in the middle. It doesn't make sense. And I know that you and I have had some discussions on, what is DevOps, and it's not the panacea that it's sometimes made out to be, but it does provide for more rapid releases, for good or bad, right? And what you put out there really depends on how well you're testing it.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, the testing is sorely lacking. It's inconsistent. It's not repeatable. It's typically being done by people who are not given the opportunity to grow and advance in their careers, the way that you and I are familiar with in the enterprise space, where testing is seen as a separate discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And those people are lifelong testers. They become, automated test engineers and performance engineers, and they do that for the rest of their career. Well, in this space, particularly in gaming, not so much in the enterprise side where they're using the same tools, but in gaming, they'll just burn out. And a lot of these testers who get into it thinking, I'm going to make a living testing video games, have a very short sort of career path.
Mm.
And either they try and get into development, which is often the goal anyways, or they just work themselves to death in manual testing. We are seeing a bit of a shift, though, and the market is warming up to the idea of providing better working conditions for QA and testers in gaming studios. There's a lot of news around unionization and investigations into company practices for those individuals. And when they talk about crunch in video gaming, they're typically referring to the testing phase, the process of making sure that it's ready to go. Because they're giving that feedback to the developers and making sure that they're ready to release in the first place. But as these games grow in scope and in complexity, and you've got these massive 3D worlds that are interactive, and you've got players all over the world connecting to one another in these environments, it becomes increasingly difficult to do that manually.
Yeah, see, that doesn't even compute with me, because it's not like these are necessarily small companies either. I mean, can you talk about how big this space actually is? I mean, it's an untapped space, but it's not it compares in numbers to enterprise all day.
Actually, it dwarfs. So gaming in general is greater in scale than all of professional sports combined. I'll let that sink in for a second.
Wow.
Because a lot, NFL, NBA, NHL, who's just happy to be on that list. A bunch of these, you get them all together, it's still smaller than video games, which last year was a $220 billion industry. It's bigger than movies, It's bigger than digital music. And so all of the Spotify's and Apple Musics of the world combined is still smaller than video games.
So if there's any industry that needs to reduce the toil, it's this industry. And I just think it's so strange that they are so dependent on automation when everybody in enterprise, that's their whole goal. And we are hearing about burnout. Like with SREs, that's one of their main things is automate as much as you can to get that toil out of there so you can do more important things. I would think that would be a natural place for the gaming community.
It is. And one of the conversations we have all the time is, are we trying to eliminate jobs? Absolutely not. You need testers to test the experience. And like you said, the more important things, is this working not just functionally, but the way that we want it to? Is it a good experience? Is this what we want to put out to our customers? And a lot of these AAA games that their budgets are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and they'll take several years, like sometimes 5 to 10 years, to develop a single project. A successful game will make $1 billion on opening weekend.
Maybe I'm in the wrong industry.
But the unsuccessful ones often, will flop, and it will result in not only loss for the company, but loss for jobs and reputation for a lot of people. And a lot of the games coming out these days are lacking in that quality of, is this fun? So visually it could be amazing, and mechanically it could be all there, but it just lacks the soul and the draw that keeps people interested. Now, that's not to say all studios are like this. There are several that are well known for having developed sort of an in-house practice around automation, and they're very successful with that. And there's some great examples out there, like the Game Developers Conference every year. They invite companies from all over the world to talk. And a few years ago, the team that did a game called The Sea of Thieves talked for about an hour. It's out on YouTube. You can search for Sea of Thieves GDC talk, and you'll see that they were successful in building automation around a really complex open world environment, 3D, procedurally generated, like really cool stuff. But the challenge is not everybody has that skill set. Not everyone has that expertise for building tools for automation. And again, that's where we come in. It's more about, how do we deliver something to the industry that empowers them, that not necessarily for one team or project or even in one company, but something that can be widely used across the industry. And that's why I say, think of it as like the selenium for gaming and gaming technology.
Let's dive into that just a bit, because I actually want to show your website off, and I want you to talk about Gamedriver and the things that you offer. And I'm interested in, like, how would this kind of automation differ from, your in-tier website, your Web 2.0, and the things that I'm used to seeing. How is this different to automate?
So we try to keep it as close as possible. The concepts are very, very similar. We talk about things like object identification. How do we make that resilient so that the things that I'm looking for now don't change from early in development to later in the release? We're really taking 20 plus years of experience from enterprise and kind of applying it to these concepts. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is that object identification language. A website provides a DOM, right? And you can talk to the DOM and understand where objects are and where they are in relation to each other. The game engine doesn't provide anything like this to a tester. I'm either intimately familiar with the app and how it was developed, or I'm coming at it like a black box and I have no idea, and I'm just inputting like a user would. So we provide the interface for locating objects in a resilient way, so that if it's a different screen size, or from my computer here, I've got this giant wide screen to one that's smaller, to a mobile device, that object's going to shift and move, and it's going to be different on a different device at a different time. And without even getting into the complexities of 3D and shifting environments and stuff like that. So our integration is direct to the engine, and then we provide the tester with a consistent way of identifying things. Not just identifying, by the way, how to communicate with those objects, how to query them, how to get properties out of them, and also manipulate those properties. Say I want to set up something in a test and not have to run through it in a very kind of brittle manner. I want to set certain properties to set up the conditions of the test, perform my inputs like a user would, and then check the result. So again, we provide that interface, and we do it in a way that's consistent so that if you're coming from Unity or Unreal, which are very different game engines, we also support a little indie developer darling called Godot. These are very different environments. But to the tester, we provide the same language, the same tools to do the automation across these. And that's really the goal.
I would suspect that this is still, whatever technology is being used, there's still a need for how does it work beyond one user?
Absolutely.
Concurrency. So how do you deal with the concurrency issue? What are the types of use cases for that?
Yeah. So very early on, we built support for multiplayer scenarios. So we can create multiple instances of our test client and reach out to, whether it's running on the same machine or separate physical machines or VMs in a closet somewhere. There's separate mobile devices. Several of our customers are using it in these multiplayer scenarios. And so because we're building on top of standard tools like NUnit, you can just incorporate other aspects of the testing that you want to look at it from different dimensions, right? So we're doing the workload automation, say across multiple physical or virtual clients for this game. And then we're also injecting maybe more load to the backend APIs using other tools, which are integrated with the test itself as we're capturing metrics. And so this is one of the use cases we promote to our customers a lot. And a lot of them aren't thinking about it in that way that, hey, we need to do a performance test. Let's just open it up to the world for a beta test, they call it. And for beta weekend or open beta weekend, we'll collect usage statistics. Meanwhile, if the customers are coming in and that game functions poorly under load, they're already getting that negative feedback in their heads about how this thing's going to do when it goes live. And so there's a lot of risk in putting it out there when it's not ready.
I see. And so as you're talking, I'm getting fascinated. It's making more questions pop in my mind. So I'm hearing more and more about resiliency, not just performance, but how resilient is an application. I would think this would be another great area where resiliency, chaos, we've heard about Gremlin and some of the other players in the resiliency space. Is this something that you can also provide, or do you see other players providing this?
Yeah, our problem space is such that we have enough to chew on just in working with the game engines and the different platforms. But we did intentionally build Gamedriver in a way that it's very easy to bring in those other elements, those other aspects of the testing, whether it's applet tools for the visual comparison of the assets, which we don't do, but they do very well. I add a single line to my test, and now I have the applet tools eyes focusing on the screenshots, and I ship my screenshots out to applet tools to do the comparison. Same with GameBench for the performance metrics on the device itself. Add another single line to the test, and now I'm collecting the performance metrics. And same with some of these other tools. It's really easy for us to just incorporate that into the test itself. And like I said, we focus on workload automation. What the users do with it, really, it's endless. And there should be more focus on, particularly these multiplayer scenarios and games that you mentioned. I'll mention one customer out of Australia that was doing an online poker tournament game. And they just a couple of guys, and they didn't expect it to grow the way that it did. It became very popular overnight. And their big focus was on exactly that, and the resiliency of the application. So their intent was to simulate multiplayer scenarios with Gamedriver while capturing some of the statistics there, and then again, like you said, like turning off things, like checking that, hey, if this backend endpoint gets overloaded, then what happens to the rest of the infrastructure? And it's a long road, but man, it pays off.
I bet. So the next logical step after testing and load and probably some security as well, that's all kind of built in, but observability and monitoring afterwards. Is this also a space that is ripe for that, or are there already companies that have attacked that problem?
Yeah, Backtrace is doing a really good job there. Another company that we've worked with and done some online sort of events with. They're actually part of Sauce Labs now,
Okay,
and so Sauce Labs is of course looking at browser and mobile testing, but they're capturing the observability metrics from these games and other apps building these products. But it's certainly a growing space. When you go to GDC, which is in less than 8 weeks, as I look at my calendar telling me I got lots of work to do for that event. Um, there's a growing number of companies focusing on the observability, on the error reporting and that sort of thing, because for a lot of companies, that's where they get their metrics from, their understanding of if it's working. We're trying to bring it further back in the life cycle.
sure.
As you know, like, if it's out in production, it's going to cost you a lot more to fix than if you can fix it in integration testing, for example.
And when I first heard the term observability and started diving into it, it was like, oh, we're just relabeling application performance monitoring and APM. We're just now calling it something cooler or more relevant. But that's actually not the case. There's different types of observability. There's observability into the pipeline, the testing pipeline. There's observability into the data that's separate from these backend pieces. So this is really exciting. So if somebody's interested in, like, they're a gaming company and they watch this, they're in IT and they're like, I don't want to do all this manual stuff. I want to automate this. How do they get involved with Gamedriver?
I would say start with the website. There's a free trial there with some tutorial information and some samples of how to get started. I will say that there's probably a fair number of companies that you've worked with who have some group in a closet somewhere that's doing some work in Unity or Unreal to build that company's next gen like user experience, and they're probably looking for something as well. One thing we hear a lot is developers in these small teams that often get carved out in these large organizations, very similar to what we saw in the mobile space 10 or so years ago, right? It didn't start with a whole huge team. It started with a smaller group to explore, like, how do we do this? And that's where a lot of the tools emerged. It was kind of like the wild, wild west for a while. But it started to converge into some more concrete stuff. And that's very similar to what we're seeing in this space. And so there are tools that are starting to pivot and think about how do we provide the same level of, like you said, observability throughout the life cycle in a different technology stack. But one of the things we hear from those teams is, like, I'm tired of putting on the headset. Every time I test this, I got to put on the Oculus headset. And so we provided a way to test without having to do that. And so they can test a large percentage of their functionality before they put the headset on. That way, when they do, they know everything works. Now it's just a matter of, how does it feel? Is this the experience that we're trying to get to?
Sure. Wow, this is great. I could talk to you for another couple of hours if I could, but this is something I'm glad that we're able to show to this audience, because most of my core audience is focused on that traditional enterprise space, and I'd really love for them to see the other side, that there's a big opportunity out there, especially tool makers and people who are into testing and automation. This is a great opportunity to jump into a company that doesn't have a lot of automation and show them how to do that if you're a consultant, for example. So this is great. Shane, great to talk to you. Great to see you again. You're always welcome back on the show. Let me know as you add new features and functionality to the tool, come back and tell us about it.
For sure. Would love to.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Now, that was really interesting for me, and it was really fun, and I hope you learned something out of it too. I'd like to know your feedback about, what do you think about Gamedriver, and are you into gaming to the point where you'd like to maybe automate some of that stuff and those engines and kind of test that stuff out? If that sounds exciting to you, let me know. I'm on several different social media platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. If you scan that QR code, you can find my direct links to all my sites and all the ways to get in touch with me. If you're too lazy to do that and you just want to email me, that's fine too. I've got a brand new email, heyscott@smcjournal.com. Of course, all the show notes and everything that we talked about today will be put on the smcjournal.com website for this particular episode. I hope you'll check it out. And I'd also love it if you like this video to Give me a little like on that video, click the bell so you'll know about all the different things that are coming out, all the different videos that come out on the channel, and subscribe. It really helps me know that I'm doing the right thing. But I'm always open to your feedback and where you think we ought to take the show next, which is why I'm expanding the show. So from all of us here, and when I say all of us, Galago players, Scott Moore, and Agent 503 back there, thanks for watching the SMC Journal podcast today. See you next time.